Alright, so I've never been the kind of person who shares their life on the internet. I mean, I read Reddit stories like the rest of us, but I didn't think I'd ever have one of my own worth telling. Yet here I am, typing this out because I can't stop thinking about what happened last summer. I guess you could say I'm still processing it. It started with a pretty standard family road trip. You know, the kind where everyone's cranky because they've been in the car too long, and no one can agree on a playlist. We were driving through Tennessee, heading to visit my wife's parents in Georgia. It was me, my wife Emily, and our 2 kids, Aiden, who's 8, and Sophie, who just turned 5. We'd planned to stop for the night halfway through the trip, but traffic was a nightmare, and by the time we hit the point where we were supposed to pull off, it was already late. Emily suggested we just push through and get to her parents' house, but I was exhausted, and the kids were getting restless. So, I did what any stressed-out dad would do. I looked for the nearest cheap motel. Nothing fancy, just a place where we could crash for a few hours. We found one of those older motor inns, the kind with peeling paint and neon signs that buzz like they're working too hard. It wasn't the kind of place we'd normally stay, but at that point, I didn't care. I just wanted to sleep. The guy at the front desk looked like he hadn't slept in days. He barely glanced at me as he slid the key across the counter. "Room 17, he mumbled, not even bothering to make eye contact. I paid in cash because their card machine was apparently down, and he didn't offer a receipt. That should have been my first red flag, but like I said, I was too tired to care. The room itself wasn't much better. The carpet was a weird shade of green, and the air smelled faintly of mildew, like the room hadn't been aired out in months. The bedspreads were one of those hideous floral patterns that looked like they were straight out of the 80s, and the bathroom faucet dripped constantly. But the kids didn't seem to mind. They thought it was an adventure. Sophie jumped on one of the beds, giggling, while Aiden started flipping through the channels on the ancient TV. Emily gave me a look that said, "We're never doing this again," but I just shrugged. "It's one night," I told her. "We'll survive." And that's what I thought. One night. What could go wrong? We got the kids settled into bed, which wasn't too hard because they were wiped out from the drive. Sophie fell asleep curled up with her favorite stuffed bunny, and Aiden knocked out halfway through some cartoon about talking dogs. Emily and I were both exhausted, but as tired as I was, something about the room made it hard for me to relax. At first, I chalked it up to the bad vibes of the place, like maybe it was the peeling wallpaper or the faint buzzing sound coming from the ancient light fixture. But the longer I lay there, staring at the ceiling, the more uneasy I felt. It wasn't anything I could put my finger on, just this nagging feeling in the back of my mind, like something wasn't quite right. Emily must have noticed because she whispered, "You okay?" "Yeah," I lied, rolling onto my side to face her. "Just tired." She gave me this skeptical look but didn't push it. A few minutes later, I could tell by her breathing that she'd fallen asleep. I tried to do the same, but every time I closed my eyes, I'd hear something, like a faint creak or a shuffle, just loud enough to snap me back to full awareness. At first, I figured it was the kids moving in their sleep, but then I realized the sounds were coming from above us. Now, keep in mind, this was a single-story motel. No upstairs rooms, no attic, just a flat roof above us. And yet, I could have sworn I heard footsteps. I sat up in bed, my heart pounding. It wasn't constant, more like 1 or 2 faint thuds, followed by a long pause. Then another thud, closer this time. I told myself it was nothing. Maybe a raccoon or some other animal scurrying around up there. But as much as I tried to rationalize it, I couldn't shake the feeling that whatever was making the noise wasn't an animal. Finally, I couldn't take it anymore. I got up, careful not to wake Emily, and stepped out into the hallway. The air out there felt even heavier than in the room, like it was thick with humidity or something. I glanced around, but the place was dead silent. I was about to head back inside when I noticed something strange. The door to room 16, right next to ours, was cracked open. Just a sliver, but enough to catch my attention. I hesitated. I mean, it's not like I had any reason to check it out. For all I knew, whoever was staying in there had just forgotten to close the door all the way. But the weird thing was, there hadn't been a car parked in front of that room when we pulled in. I told myself to just go back to bed, but curiosity got the better of me. I stepped closer, just enough to peek through the gap. The room was dark, but I could make out the outline of furniture, a bed, a table, and a chair tipped over on its side. It didn't look like anyone was staying there, but something about the scene made my stomach twist. That's when I saw it. On the wall, just above the headboard, there was this weird stain. At first, I thought it was just water damage or something, but as my eyes adjusted, I realized it was red. Not bright red, like fresh paint, but darker, like it had been there a while. I felt this cold chill run down my spine, and before I could stop myself, I backed away from the door. My hands were shaking as I fumbled with a key to get back into our room. Once I was inside, I locked the door and slid the chain across for good measure. Emily stirred but didn't wake up, and I stood there for a minute, just staring at the door like I expected someone to come pounding on it. I didn't sleep at all that night. Every little noise made me jump, and I kept thinking about that stain on the wall. By the time the sun came up, I was more than ready to get out of there. As soon as the kids were awake, I started packing up our stuff. Emily gave me a weird look and asked why I was in such a rush, but I just told her I wanted to get back on the road early. We were almost out the door when I noticed something else. Sophie's stuffed bunny, the one she never goes anywhere without, was missing. We tore that room apart looking for Sophie's bunny. Under the beds, behind the dresser, even in the tiny bathroom. Nothing. Sophie was on the verge of tears, clutching my leg and saying, "Daddy, I need Mr. Hops." Emily, trying to keep the situation calm, said, "We'll find it, sweetie. It probably just got mixed up with our things." But I knew it hadn't. I'd seen Sophie holding it when she fell asleep. I remember tucking it under her arm when she rolled over. It was there. And yet, it wasn't anymore. Emily suggested maybe it had slipped into the car when we were loading up, so we all went out to check. I looked under the seats, in the trunk, even in the front where there was no logical reason it could have ended up. Still nothing. "Maybe it's in the lobby?" Emily suggested. "She might have dropped it when we checked in." That made sense, so I left Emily and the kids by the car and went back inside. The guy at the front desk was still there, looking just as tired and disinterested as the night before. "Excuse me," I said, trying to keep my voice calm. "My daughter lost her stuffed animal. It's a little gray bunny. Have you seen it?" He didn't even look up, just shrugged and muttered, "Nope." I was about to leave when something caught my eye. On the counter, half hidden behind an old stack of papers, was a small, gray ear. My heart skipped. "That's it," I said, pointing. "That's her bunny." The guy finally looked up, his expression blank. He didn't move to grab it, didn't even acknowledge it was there. "You sure?" he asked, his voice flat. "Yes, I'm sure," I snapped. "Can I have it, please?" He stared at me for a second, then slowly reached over and picked up the bunny. When he handed it to me, I noticed something strange. The fabric was damp, like it had been sitting in water. I didn't have time to think about that, though. I just thanked him and rushed back to the car. Sophie's face lit up the second she saw Mr. Hops, and I felt a wave of relief. "Where was it?" Emily asked. "At the front desk," I said, trying to sound casual. But inside, I couldn't stop thinking about how it got there. Sophie hadn't left the room all night. How could her bunny have ended up at the desk? We got on the road, and I tried to put it out of my mind. But the farther we drove, the more I started noticing little things. Sophie kept holding Mr. Hops at arm's length, like she didn't want to cuddle it. When Emily asked her why, she said, "It smells funny." I took a sniff when we stopped for gas, and she was right. It smelled faintly metallic, like old pennies. That's when the pieces started clicking into place. The damp fabric, the metallic smell, the stain on the wall in room 16. I didn't say anything to Emily or the kids. What was I supposed to say? That I thought Sophie's bunny had somehow ended up in a room where something terrible might have happened? But the thing that sealed it for me happened a few days later, after we got to Emily's parents' house. Sophie was playing in the living room with Aiden when she suddenly ran up to me, her eyes wide. "Daddy," she said, holding up Mr. Hops. "He's whispering." I froze. "What do you mean, he's whispering?" She tilted her head like she was trying to hear better. "He says he doesn't like it here. He wants to go back to the room." To this day, I don't know what happened in that motel. Maybe it was nothing, just a string of coincidences that got under my skin. But sometimes, when I'm alone at night, I think about those footsteps on the roof, the stain on the wall, and the way Sophie's bunny felt damp when I picked it up. And I wonder if we really left that place behind, or if some part of it followed us home.